Let me read to you a passage from the 6th chapter of St. Luke's Gospel, verses 1 to 5. It's the Gospel for Saturday of the 22nd week of Ordinary Time. St. Luke writes, "One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the cornfields, and his disciples began to pick some ears of corn, rub them in their hands, and eat the grain. Some of the Pharisees asked, 'Why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?' Jesus answered them, 'Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and taking the consecrated bread, he ate what is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. Then Jesus said to them, 'The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath.'" That's from Luke chapter 6, verse 1 to 5. We are led to think of the Lord. Our Gospel passage I've just read is taken from St. Luke, and our incident today is not the first time our Lord's supreme authority is highlighted. At the beginning of his public ministry, our Lord is approached by the devil. Luke chapter 4, verse 2. One temptation the devil attempts is the prospect of possessing supreme temporal authority. "And the devil took him up and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time." Chapter 4, verse 5. Matthew adds, in his chapter 4, verse 8, that this was on a very high mountain. It is not clear, but it seems to imply not just the current kingdoms, but past and future as well. If so, then presumably, our Lord saw the past kingdoms of Mesopotamia, Persia, Egypt, Greece, the current empire of Rome and its satellite kingdoms, the future kingdoms of East and West, the Islamic Empire, the rise of Europe, our own day, and the kingdoms that will rise and fall in the future prior to his coming at the end. St. Luke tells us that the devil promises to give him all this authority and their glory, for it has been given to me, he said. Luke chapter 4, verse 6, provided Jesus worships him. That was the deal offered. Satan would not have made such an offer had he not divined that in this man before him there were the makings of the world's supreme Lord. He was determined to get him on side, or failing that, to crush him. But of course Satan totally miscalculated, for he had absolutely met his match. Jesus would be the Lord of all the kingdoms, but in a sense and through means beyond the devil's understanding. The issue, though, was authority. When our Lord had risen from the dead, he told his disciples that all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Matthew chapter 28, verse 17. The issue of Christ's authority continued through his public ministry. We read in the same Gospel of Luke that, and I quote, "He went down to Capernaum, a town of Galilee." This geographical clarification that Capernaum was a town of Galilee, suggesting that Luke was writing for non-Jewish readers. "And he was teaching them on the Sabbath. And they were astonished at his teaching, for his word was with authority." Luke chapter 4, verse 31 to 32. Then, after driving out a demon from a man in the synagogue, we read, "All were amazed and said to one another, 'What is this word? For with authority and power he commands the unclean spirits, and they come out.'" Chapter 4, verse 36. Simon Peter, seeing the catch of fish, addresses Jesus as Lord, and Jesus tells him that he will be catching men, alluding to Christ's universal lordship. All of this brings us to our Gospel that I read earlier from Luke chapter 6, verse 1 to 5, which concludes with our Lord's claim to lordship even of the Sabbath. It is commonly known that the Pharisees made a tremendous contribution in setting the observance of the Sabbath at the forefront of the life of the people. The Sabbath was a distinctive feature of the Judaism of the time, and this was due in no small measure to the efforts of the Pharisees. But it had got out of hand. They gradually made the law of the Sabbath a great burden by their complicated legislation and practices. Exaggeration was rife. I have read that some rabbis held that even the torches of Gehenna were suspended on the Sabbath, and that if one were to keep 2 Sabbaths perfectly, one's salvation was assured. So within such a context, one can understand the objection of the Pharisees that the disciples were violating the Sabbath in picking some ears of corn, rubbing them in their hands, and eating the grain while passing through the cornfields. In other words, in effect, by their action, the disciples were harvesting crops on the Sabbath day. Our Lord refuses to enter casuistical discussions on such an absurdity, and after a preliminary reference to scriptural precedents, makes the astounding claim that he is Lord even of the Sabbath. Let us contemplate the scene of our Lord's utter uniqueness. No prophet nor any other personage would have dared to make such a statement, but Jesus Christ made it without the slightest hesitation. He is the Lord of lords, the Messiah, King of kings, and in his hands lie all authority in heaven and on earth. Let us follow him to the end then, basing our whole lives on his teaching.